Hello and welcome to the Red Chair podcast series. I'm Manuel Collazo, Vice President of Strategic Marketing and Business Development for Association Headquarters. For more than 45 years, AH has provided association leaders, volunteers, and staff with the most relevant and compelling industry news and information. Episode in this year's Red Chair podcast series. I'm Manuel Collazo, Vice President of Strategic Marketing and Communications for Association Headquarters, and today we're talking about how to build a strategic marketing plan. What's the difference between strategy and tactic? What's an appropriate budget? We're going to cover these topics and more. Joining me is Association Headquarters Director of Strategic Marketing, Michelle Covington, and Director of Content and Creative, Janaba Figueroa. Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I have just joined AH back in March under Manuel, as we're looking to, in our own organization, build a more strategic MarCom program. I have about 25 years of experience in different areas of marketing and communications and events. And prior to coming here to AH, I was director internationally for marketing and communications for a worldwide organization. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to bring that experience here and be able to implement that worldwide knowledge to our clients that we have.
Thanks. Janaba, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Janaba Figueroa. I'm the Director of Content and Creative for Association Headquarters. I've worked with the company for a short while, but for over 20 years working for nonprofits on branding, storytelling, and content development. Super excited to be here. I came from Rutgers University, where I led strategic marketing efforts in the Department of Equity and Inclusion for the President's Administration, and then also for the graduate school as Director of Marketing, where I was really able to tell the story of the graduate school and shape messages that not only brought in new students, but helped to build the brand of the graduate school. And so branding, storytelling, content development is really what I'm all about. And I'm glad that I'll be working with you and also Michelle. And I'm really excited to be able to bring AH to the forefront of strategic marketing efforts, to work with both of you on marketing, on branding, on developing content that really speaks to our members. So I'm just happy to be here.
Excellent. We're excited to have you here, both of you. So before we dig in, I thought it would be great if we talked a little bit about what strategic marketing is, right? Because I think my experience with associations in particular has been that marketing is a lot of stuff, right? It's if we're not doing 100 things a week, we're not effectively marketing our brand or our value proposition, right? And so I think sort of level setting and starting with what strategic marketing is and is not would be great for our audience as a starting point. So from my perspective, strategic marketing is first and foremost about brand. Building the brand, creating brand awareness. It's how we differentiate from our competition. Michelle, tell us what you think strategic marketing is.
At a high level, simply put, I think strategic marketing is deploying a multitude of tactics to reach goals. But the strategy part of it is what is usually missed. It's usually, we see associations that just want to your point, have a handful of different tactics and put them out there and execute on them, but there's not an end goal to it. So that becomes the strategy piece, is where are we going, why, how, not just the how or the what. So that's how I look at it, is really connecting goals to what you're doing.
Alignment,
yeah.
Right? Yeah, no, I would agree completely. Janata, how does the content and creative piece drive strategy?
It really, when I think about strategy, what I think about is sort of this big picture. I'm a very visual person. And so being able to consider all things, I keep saying this to our team, and so being able to see exactly where an organization is and then be able to understand and have conversations around where the organization wants to go at the end of the day. And the only way to be able to do that is that if you can see all the moving pieces and be able to determine whether those pieces are going to allow for growth. And if they're not, being able to look at the analytics of an organization, being able to consider the competition, trends, any innovations that might be coming forward in that particular industry, and say, how can we reshape the plan that you have or the plan that you don't have in order to move a thing forward. But we have to be able to see it, you know, as a content team.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's hard to do because we're so busy doing the work.
In the work. It's such a good point. You know, one of the things that when I first started working with nonprofits and associations, I was honestly pleasantly surprised to find out that most have a formal strategic planning function, right? They get together, there's a group of stakeholders, and they talk at some point at the end of one fiscal year before going into the other. We're all familiar with how this works. But then what was surprising to me was a lot of what are considered support functions, right, and marketing is typically considered a support function, aren't invited to the table for the planning, right? So that for me, in terms of how do we make sure we're being strategic as an organization, is an important first step, right? Make sure that your marketing folks are at the table, right? And they're helping define what the priorities of the company are and how do we reach the goals, right? So how do we make sure we're being strategic, right? That's a question that I've heard several times in just the last year as we've been talking to more of our association client partners about making sure that they're a little less tactical and a little more strategic. Well, what does that mean, right? How do we know that we're being strategic? Michelle, I think the point that you brought up about making sure that there's an alignment in everything you do, right? So all companies should have, in my opinion, 3 to 5 strategic priorities. I think a lot of times you come out of one of these sessions and there's a list of 50 things we want to accomplish. If you have more than 5, I think you probably want to go back and create a second draft, right? Let's be realistic with ourselves and let's make those things meaty. Janelle, but what about you? What are some of the tests in your mind? If we're doing this, if it looks like this, then it is in fact supporting the strategic plan.
I think kind of taking a step back and, like you said, one of the things that I do often is I study the strategic priorities, you know, when I first come into a new role, to really understand what the organization wants, where leadership is headed. Because once you know that, then you can take a look at how the how the plan breaks down and try to figure out a way that where you fit in that plan. And so that's always been a part of my process, is understanding, 1, the strategic priorities, 2, understanding the breakdown of the plan, and then 3, you know, situating our team, especially content and creative, to be engaged and involved in each aspect of that strategic aspect. So if there's 5 strategic priorities, being able to kind of take a look at one of them and go, you know, this is what you want, right? This is what's happening. What can we do to push forward that strategic priority in a way that brings that goal or particular initiative to success?
Michelle, anything come to mind with client partners today?
I think what we have tried to do as we are rescoping and working and continuing to work with our partners is really starting to ask the deeper questions. I think buzzwords are our biggest challenge, is these associations or organizations here, well, you know, this association's using this, we want to use that. And it's like, but why? First of all, do you know what that is? Do you know what it does? Do you know what that tactic does?
Right.
And then how does that connect to your strategic plan or the goals that you have for your organization? And so that's what we're really starting to do with our partners, is say, okay, you've now said that you want 150 emails a year. You want to communicate to your members 3 times a week. Why? and it's just like, well, you know, I think they want that value. They think that that's valuable. Well, we're doing stuff. Well, stuff doesn't necessarily translate to success or reaching the goal. So we kind of drive it back a little bit and say, okay, let's think about this. How about once a week? And let's make that robust, applicable content that people want to actually open and read. And then when we have a special event come up, a particular initiative come up, or a new goal that's come on into play within the year, then we can do an overlay communication plan around that, and then that'll really pop. But when you're constantly, there's a barrage of communications all the time, that's going to get lost. And it's not going to be listened to or read or opened. And we find that when we take a look at the analytics, we see that drop off rate in terms of what our open rate is and that type of thing. So that's really what we're trying to do, is drill down with all the things that some associations think they need and really get behind it as to, well, what goal are you trying to achieve, or why do you want to do this? And sometimes it's as simple as, well, this is what the board wants to do.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, but let's make this work for you. So maybe it's not exactly the way you're envisioning it. We can still use that tactic, but let's do it so it's driving to a goal.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So what I heard you talk about was cadence, right? And it's absolutely valid that a good marketing program has a rhythm, and there's a minimum cadence that we need to maintain, right? We need to be out in front of our audiences on some consistency, whether that's once a week or 8 times a week. I think it sort of depends on what goal or priority, right? If there's an event you're marketing and you're 3 months out, probably twice a week is enough. And once you're 4 weeks out, maybe you need to be 3 to 5 times a week, right? So I do think there's validity when our client partners come to us and say, I need to be doing a volume of activity. Yes, there's truth in that, right? But we need to be more prescriptive in what the tactics are that kind of keep the brand out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to shift gears for us a little bit and talk about profitability, right? I know that marketing is seen in many associations as an expense item, right? And there's truth in that. Everything comes with a cost. But in non-association world, which is kind of where I started my career, I think there's a little more acceptance that marketing is a necessary part of everything we do in the organization, right? And so the way I think we overcome that barrier is to be able to talk about things like return on investment and how does marketing make you more profitable, or are certain campaigns, can we expect a specific marketing campaign to be profitable, which means is it measurable? So one of the most common problems that we have as marketing professionals is this idea that marketing is purely an expense, right? So our challenge, of course, is to find opportunities to tie strategic marketing to profitability, to improved revenue, audience growth, things like that. So, there are a variety of ways, of course, that we do that. When we set up campaigns, we make sure that we have specific metrics and targets and goals in mind. But at the same time, I think we want to be really careful about how much specificity we promise in marketing, right? Because so much of it is immeasurable, right? Doesn't make it fluff or just an expense, but when you're talking about promoting brand awareness, which ultimately drives audience and things like that. So the question I have for the two of you is, how do you ensure that we're tying marketing to some level of profitability? Janaba?
I really think it's the data. As much as I am a content and creative person, and I think very creatively, I also think, how does your publication, your asset, whatever it is that you use to brand yourself as an agency, right? How does that communicate to the different audiences that you have? And how are they then being brought back to either your website or the platforms that you have, in order to be able to determine how things move and whether or not they're moving at a pace and in a way that would be beneficial for you financially. Because if you can't see that and you don't know that, and you're not spending time, looking at your Google Analytics, analyzing how your campaigns are returning, then you don't know what you need to do next in order to be profitable. And so just taking some time to really do a website audit, or to do some different audits for your business, is really important to see how your content is actually performing. So that's where I would start, I think.
And I would jump in with that I think that digital is key in terms of being able to use that technology and that data that we have, and then be able to have that as a starting point to create different tactics and strategies to implement. A perfect example would be when we get analytics back, and we might see that there is a 50% bounce rate in email communications that we're sending out. okay, well, maybe this is an opportunity to take a deeper dive into your database and clean that up so that we can have really measurable and accurate data that we can work off of. I think the other piece as well is, and this is the work on the front end with the organizations, is having a better understanding and having more concrete goals. Usually we get a response that's like, well, we want to increase membership. Well, what does that mean? Are you looking to increase membership in a particular segment?
Why do you want to do that?
Yeah, are you looking to increase membership as a whole, and then by what percentage? How many? Those types of things. You can't really work on executing a strategy if there isn't a definitive end goal.
Right, and then using that data to be able to determine what those questions are, because you can't come up with the questions if you don't have the information. You can't just pop up with, these are the goals that we want. You have to have a reason why you want to change those goals that you already have in place.
Sure.
Michelle, I know that you and I just spoke briefly about a specific client partner who was, I believe, initially it was about saving money, right? And through that, within some auditing, we ended up doing a database cleanup. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Constant Contact is something that we use as a vehicle to communicate to membership databases, typically. And it's, the cost to do that is based on the number of emails that you have in your database. So a great example was we were seeing a really high bounce rate with the organization. And what had happened is when we went in and cleaned out the duplicates and the ones that were no longer accurate emails, we were able to bring that down from, I think it was 12,000 different emails down to 5. And what that did is that brought their rate and their cost down because there were less emails we were sending it to. So it saved them about $1,200 a year. So something very simple like that, so creating efficiencies in the process and being very mindful of what we're doing really brings, can be helpful in that regard too as a cost savings. So yes, there is an expense to, sending those communications out, but if you can really drill down and make sure that what you're doing is accurate and correct, you're bringing that cost down too. So those are some of the different tactics that are very low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and how to help an organization out.
And then it gives you like a really clear understanding of who's engaged on your platforms. And so you get to really look at your organic reach in a way that says, oh, we thought we were only reaching 10% of the people that are part of those lists, right? But no, we're reaching 30% actually. We just have bad information.
Yeah.
And that happens across the board. It's not just specific to one organization or agency. It's really common. You know what I mean? To have an organization sort of not know who's part of their audience and who's on their list that maybe shouldn't be there anymore.
Well, I think that's a great point, and there's almost a shame, right, when we talk to clients about this because they feel like they should know, or how do we not know, but I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one, years ago, not that long ago, it was all about getting the biggest list, right? Because we were starting from scratch. So whether it was 3 years ago or 10 years ago, we were building our lists.
Yes.
And the goal was get as many people in the list as you can.
And you paid for them if you had to.
Yeah, no shame in that, right?
Yeah.
We did our job. And I think the other piece is, there is what we talked about earlier, is this idea that more is better, right? And that, I think, plagues marketers, and it goes back to what we said earlier about, this idea of more stuff is going to be better. So I think it's a combination of those two things that have a lot of our client partners believing that the bigger the list, the better, right? But Janaba, I think you bring up an excellent point, particularly when you're trying to use data to drive better decisions. If you're, reaching 100 out of 1,000, right, then 10% doesn't sound so great. But when really the list is only 600 from a valid perspective, well, now you've just tripled, your performance. And so it's a very worthwhile exercise. And I think the last piece is, we're marketers, we're not IT folks. So I do think, particularly in volunteer-driven organizations, there's a bit of fear of the unknown, right? And IT, I think for the the majority of us, is the one area of the business where we'd rather not play, right? We have experts for that. It's a specialty area. But if we're thinking strategic, then it really is just about who are we reaching, what's the audience, and we can use a partner with that subject matter expertise to help us with the cleanup.
And Janelle brought up a really good point about the audits, and that's something that we do at AH, whereas we bring in subject matter experts in this particular area. So we have a director of web solutions who comes in and does a digital audit and takes a look at what is the organization doing just holistically from the digital footprint. And then we have a senior account manager who comes in and looks at their communications and their marketing. And then I came in and kind of looked at their programs and how those were performing. And we just did one a couple months ago with NAPO. And it was really effective because we could come in, we looked at all different areas of their marketing communications strategy, provide some recommendations, and it was brought back to the board. And that really helped their conversations and where do we want to go and where are we maybe missing the boat, or what can we rein back on because the performance here isn't where we want it to be. And so audits are comprehensive and maybe organizations can't quite do them every year, but it is something they should be revisiting every couple of years for sure.
No, that's a great point. And I think the other thing that you brought up, which is worth clarifying, is marketing is not one universal function or skill set, right? The world has changed, and there are lots of facets to a good marketing program, and so there are different skills. And the benefit of working with association headquarters and we and other ASMs is we have an in-house agency, right? So we have a lot of very specific subject matter expertise that, quite frankly, with an association, you can't expect yourselves to have all those skills in-house. We build the strategic plans, but we do in fact insource, as you pointed out, to our digital marketing experts and our web solutions folks. And we manage those projects and those scopes to make sure that we have the best skills and the most talented people on that specific part of the project scope.
And that's what we make sure we do with any type of work. So we have been working on a couple different branding projects recently, and obviously working very closely with Janava's team. We just finished one with MRAA, and it's not just about here's a logo, here's your color scheme, here's a theme, here's a tagline. It's about how are we communicating it to the membership, how are we making that transition clear. And so my team takes a look at it and says, okay, how are we going to do the outreach? But then we have our web solutions team come in from a digital perspective and be like, okay, this is important, we're changing this, so maybe we need to take a look at our SEO. Maybe we need to take a look at our keyword search. We need to change that because we've changed our brand.
Right.
And so that is something that AH does really well, is integrating all aspects of marketing to make sure we're having a comprehensive solution and not just working in one vertical.
And being intentional about all that work too. So being able to look at what needs to be done from the standpoint of the client. It's very specific to the client. And that's one of the things that I'm learning now, because it's a new role, right? But at the same time, it's, we're uber focused on making sure that that client actually reaches success in a very intentional way. And everyone at AH is making sure that happens. And so, and being able to think too, also in advance, when we need to pivot if something should change, like COVID. Yeah. COVID was probably, I don't know what happened with a lot of our members, but I'm sure we kept going. You keep going. You change your plans. You make, strategy that is effective and that's going to work for your audience right now, where the audience is, and not just, the paper days are over, and so we still, produce, obviously, in-hand publications, but the whole concept of being able to reach someone maybe who's in Africa, or somebody who's, across in some country in Asia, that's possible, and so being able to think beyond just sort of where we are in New Jersey and the United States, but how can I reach the person who really needs this information, right where they sit, no matter where they are.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, we have international partners, right? I mean, INMN is one of our partners that reaches audience on a global scale. In fact, with a publication. So you both mentioned 2 points that I want to come back to. So the first one is the word purposeful and intentional, right? So I would say at the heart of any good strategy, there is clear intent, right? And I think that is one of the really easiest differentiators if you're being overly tactical versus being more strategic, right? I think an overly tactical plan tends to be inertia driven, right? It's just a lot of stuff happening in perpetuity, whereas being strategic is an intent, everything you do, right? From the words that you use to convey the message, to the tactic that you've chosen, to the frequency, there's an intent behind it. But the other word that I want us to talk about for a bit here is branding, right? So you mentioned, Michelle, MRA, or the Marine Retailers Association in America, a new client partner with AH, and we've been working with them for several months. Like many associations, I think it's a post-pandemic phenomenon. We're getting a lot of requests for brand refresh or rebranding, renaming. It depends on, there's a depth variance in those projects, but this idea of branding, and I'll tell you, as a marketing professional, I have a new hope for associations just by the demand for this branding work, because that's where it all starts, right? You cannot build an effective strategy if you don't know your brand, you don't know who you are, what you stand for, what your value proposition is, all parts of a brand. Michelle, start us off, talk us through at a high level initially the process, right? How does an association go about rebranding or a brand refresh?
Sure. So, part of it is taking a look at where you're at and why are you looking to make that change? Like, what's not working for you, or what do you think you represent that you no longer represent, or are pivoting into a new area of focus and want your brand to encompass that. So it's really kind of drilling down and seeing where you're at. I think the key then after that is really tapping into key stakeholders. And that can be a variety of individuals. Sometimes it's member driven, sometimes it's the board and certain committees, and really just having an understanding as to what does this brand mean to you. Those who are members, they join for a reason, and there's a value proposition, and it's exciting for those members. That's why they're a part of it. So you have to be very careful and mindful that when you're doing a branding reorg or a branding rename, that you're making sure that you're not necessarily taking away something of value to your current membership, and really you want to more grow and incorporate. And so that's really where you need to start, is having a better understanding of what everyone's perspective is in the moment. Then it's really about starting to build out who you are and your identity. So we've identified this is where we are today, where do we want to go, and who do we want to be? And we need to create our own persona in terms of when people hear our name or see our logo, what resonates for them? What is it? What emotion is brought out in that? Because people get attached to things. So you can get as specific in our process as looking at font and color, and I mean those are all decisions that are pretty serious. It seems flip and it seems like something that wouldn't necessarily matter, but it does, because certain colors bring out certain emotions in people, and you want to make sure that's connecting to who you want to be as a brand. So once we start to build out that, then it's really like, okay, we have this a little bit of a look and a feel as to who we are, but now we really want to start building out and tying in what our mission is and what the vision is of the organization. And if that isn't already decided, it should be prior to that visual component. But assuming it has been, then you start to incorporate that in all your messaging. And then what we do is then we start to communicate that. It's not as simple as, hey, let's throw a few emails out, or let's just launch this at an event and saying we're now this. There's a transition period there. And that we need to be very mindful of the communications within that transition period of time. But then you do need at some point to have a cutoff and say, we now identify as this. And so we work with organizations through that entire process, nurturing them through and providing speaking points and educating the board and members on how we represent moving forward. And then again, we take a look at the presence online and what assets do we need to change and how do we make that shift. So again, it's a very comprehensive process with Janaba's team and our web team and then the Marcom team to make sure that we're truly a partner in this process to them. It's not, here's a new logo, here you go, how do you like it?
Yeah, it's interesting. You said something that I want to punctuate because I think before as an association starts or really thinks about a rebrand, the why is so important. I've worked with organizations that had a customer service issue or had an audience issue, right? Some of their value propositions may have changed, so losing a part of their audience. Branding is not a solution for those things, right? You have to fix those things, whatever that might mean to your organization, right? If you have a service issue, a new logo, a new brand is not going to fix that, right? Our members and our audiences are smart, right? So they're going to see through that, right? So it definitely make sure that you're sort of starting with the why, right? So sometimes it's that we've been around a long time and it feels outdated, it's not relevant, but most of the time it's purposeful and it's intentional. We've started these 3 new curriculum, right? And so who we are is evolved, and that brand from 10 years ago doesn't represent this new stuff that we're doing, right? That's a great reason to look at a new brand. Or we've branched out, right? We're a medical association and we're now including these specialty areas. So the brand has evolved, who we are, what we do, the value, what we provide has changed. That's a reason to think about a rebrand, right? Rebrands don't fix problems, right? So be clear on that. Janaba, your team is really critical for any of these rebranding projects that we do. I want to be clear before I answer this question to you that brands are not logos. They're not color palettes. They're not, right? Those are visual representations of a brand. So starting with the why and defining who you are is the most important first step. But as I mentioned earlier, seems to be this great, almost pent-up demand coming out of the pandemic, and whether it's because we're in person again, there's sort of this freedom in coming out, taking off the mask and getting out of the house, and I think organizations are feeling that to a bit, and we love it. But talk to us about specific clients or not, but sort of what the process is from a content and creative standpoint to support these rebrands.
I think really kind of taking a look at what Michelle's team comes up with in terms of what the strategic priorities should be for that brand initiative, right? And then deciding that what needs to happen is relative to how things feel from an audience standpoint, you know? And so being able to look at someone's content and say, you know, what you're pushing out to me doesn't produce the message that you think, you know? And so being able to be very honest and intentional about how the message conveys to a specific audience is really, really, really important for me. And so, you know, even working like, for instance, with Impact Magazine, first of all, Impact makes sense, right? APTA, private practice, for what they do as physical therapists. It's so many things that you could talk about, you know, within that realm. They do a great job of helping people understand what's important for someone who is in private practice, you know, and how they should run their business, how they should interact with their customers. It's very interesting because it's so much information and it's so well thought out in terms of how they lay out the stories, the letter from the president, that kind of thing. It kind of gives us as a content and creative team more insight into what we can do to improve those efforts, what we can do to kind of sort of drive home the goal that they have, you know, to engage more with their clients and members. So I think it's just a matter of being able to look at what the audience needs in line with the vision of the organization, and then kind of sort of come together with Michelle's team, with you, to really determine and bring together sort of this full plan that is the strategy, is the vision, and it incorporates the strategic priorities.